Do you want to zoom around at high speeds, lock down enemies with stakes shot from your crossbow, and then finish them off with high burst damage from afar? Then maybe you want to play the Demon Hunter build in Path of Exile 2. Although the crossbow is normally considered a mercenary weapon, it can be slow and take some time to reload, which you can't do while dodging, but the ranger ascendancy of Deadeye gives extremely high movement, attack speed, and extra projectiles, so we can put the crossbow on a ranger to use the high velocity ammo shots for a fast and bursty playstyle that uses mobility, passive evasion, and crowd control to avoid damage, so you don't need to dodge roll and you can keep pumping out crossbow rounds non-stop. This also aesthetically resembles a demon hunter from that other ARPG or a vampire slayer like Van Helsing. So if that sounds fun to you, then I'll be providing the full build and guide, including the skill gems, passive tree, the leveling process, and how to transition into endgame content. Please read the description and pinned comment if you need any other information, and if you end up liking this content, then please subscribe because I have other fun and effective builds for Path of Exile 2, and I plan to make more. So let's start with the leveling process. Very early on at skill gem level 3, you'll get access to high velocity rounds, which is going to be your main skill in this build. It has great base damage, it knocks enemies back, and it pierces baseline. However, it only has 1 ammo per reload, which slows this down a lot, which is why we're going to be stacking attack speed, which reduces the time it takes to reload, and then adding even more reload speed on top of that to make the skill really pop off. One thing to remember is that crossbows need strength and dexterity, so unlike normal bows that only need dexterity, this requires some strength, but we can use some of that strength to get access to some other useful tricks later on. The skill gems I show will be increasingly less mandatory the further they are to the right, so if you can't get the extra skill gem links, then you'll know which ones to exclude. But there is a somewhat cheap way to get 4 links on your skill gems by using low level skill gems, upgrading them with a lesser jewel to get the 3rd slot, then using a Val Orb to roll the dice to get a 4th slot. If it doesn't give you that 4th slot, you throw it away and start again. And if you do get it, then you can level it up with a higher level skill gem. This is always going to be a much cheaper way to get links than using a greater jeweler orb, but since it corrupts them, you can't use a gem cutter prism or the perfect jeweler orb on them. So this strategy is nice at the start, but in the late game, you'll need to start over and shell out the big bucks to get that 5th slot. So the most important skill gems for high velocity rounds are Scattershot, which gives you 3 rounds that are a bit slower and do a little bit less damage, but it's 3 of them and they don't spread out that much, meaning you can easily burst one target with all 3 hits. Then Double Barrel adds another ammo and reduces your reload, allowing you to get out many more shots in a short amount of time. Then Martial Tempo gives 25% attack speed, which if you think about how expensive attack speed is on the passive tree, it's a lot of value. Finally, we want Leverage because it gives extra crit chance to immobilized enemies, and this is where some optional choices come into play. I use the Bushwhack Lizard Scale Boots, which cause all physical damage to build up pin on enemies, which locks them in place for 4 seconds. Since I'm spamming high velocity rounds, which is only physical damage, I can easily keep enemies in place to more easily aim at them and keep them away so that I can just build full damage and kill them before they can approach. If you don't want to or can't access those boots for pinning, then you can replace Leverage with Brutality for more damage. Then there's Gas Grenade. We don't care too much about poison or chaos damage, but what's nice is that this is a short animation, so you don't need to invest much time into throwing the grenade, and we can slot in Corrosion, Demolisher, and Deadly Poison to make that poison apply armor break, which will increase our physical damage scaling. So on enemies that take a bit longer to kill, you can use the gas grenade to supplement your normal crossbow bolts, but there's even more to it because high velocity rounds will consume armor break to deal double damage, and the Shards Scavenger Spirit Gem will automatically reload our weapon when consuming armor break. So it's generally best to just attack into armor break for the extra damage, but since you can't control this too much, it's best not to overthink it and just apply more armor break and spam your bolts. I've got Precision and Cannibalism slotted in there as well. Another way to quickly reload is with emergency reload, which does exactly what you think it does. It just reloads you faster. So you need to get with the rhythm of immediately pressing this whenever you use that last ammo, because the longer you take to press it, the less value you get from it. Use this mostly to burst enemies when you're in a tough situation and need to get them off of you fast, or just for extra damage over time. I use Premeditation, Ingenuity, and Lifetap here because there aren't many other choices. Ideally, you want to rotate between Emergency Reload and Shard Scavenger to maximize your attack speed. So what you'll often do is put out Gas Grenade at the start, pop off your ammo, Emergency Reload before the armor is fully broken, then keep attacking and let the poison get the armor break where you'll automatically reload and keep firing. If you hold down the attack, then you'll automatically shoot the next shot whenever it's ready, which is nice when you don't expect the reload to happen. But you don't want to hold down your attack button all the time because this slows your movement. Just tapping it will shoot the round off, then you can press it again once the attack animation ends. Get used to the feel of your attack so you can press the button at the exact interval you need, which essentially allows you to attack as often as possible while still maintaining maximum movement speed, which helps you to stay alive and keep mowing down enemies. High velocity rounds is going to feel really good when you're killing one enemy at a time, or going down a narrow corridor where enemies line up to be shot down with one bolt. But in wide open areas, you can be easily swarmed and not be able to kill enemies fast enough before they reach you. This is when you need to use a secondary ammo type from Galvanic Shards. This is a wide spray of hybrid elemental damage, so it won't pin enemies very quickly and it does very low amounts of damage each hit, but it chains to nearby targets, meaning it can scale up when there are many enemies stacked near each other. Use the Chain skill gem to give the lightning bolts an extra target jump, then Fork, which spreads the projectiles after they hit a target, allowing you to get even more hits and therefore more chains. And then Ricochet, which allows the projectiles to bounce off of walls, essentially giving them another chance to hit a target and create another lightning chain. In small areas where there isn't much room for enemies to spread out, Ricochet is really nice, but it doesn't get much use in some of the maps that have no terrain or they're just open fields, so you can replace that with Primal Armament or Lightning Infusion. One final ammo I use, albeit very rarely, is the Plasma Blast. This takes a long time to charge up, then it does a huge burst of damage. It's hard to use because by the time it's charged up, you spent at least 2 seconds moving slower and not being able to dodge, and enemies could be chasing you and you're not really peeling for yourself. So the payoff is good, but not worth it in most situations. However, when you can preemptively charge this in anticipation of an enemy approaching you or before a boss fight, the payoff can be worth it if you just use it one time and then swap ammo. So to maximize this opening burst, I went for Ambush for guaranteed crits on full health enemies, Supercritical to increase that crit damage further, and then Lasting Shock because this is a lightning skill that has a much higher chance to shock, which makes the target take 20% more damage for that entire duration. So we increased the base duration of shock from 4 to 8 seconds, and that allows us to open up on bosses with some extra burst. Next is Wind Dancer. It gives some extra evasion rating passively until we're hit, at which point it knocks enemies back and resets the evasion rating bonus until it can stack up again, which is nice for when you get stuck in a corner because the first enemy that hits you gets knocked back, and then you can dodge roll out of that corner to escape, which is why I use Magnified Effect and Blind, which reduces enemy accuracy, making up for the evasion rating you lose momentarily. Then Herbalism for some extra flask value because there aren't many better options for using that last bit of spirit. Now the next two skills are entirely optional. Attrition can replace Shard Scavenger or Wind Dancer. You can get more spirit to use all of them, but essentially this just increases your damage to rare mobs and bosses the longer you've been near them. Generally you don't want fights to last that long, but some of the hardest bosses won't die instantly, so this can be nice to swap to situationally. Finally, we have a Leap Slam, which is a mace skill, and we don't use maces, but since we have strength to use crossbows, we may as well use a low-level Leap Slam that we can toggle a second weapon set of a mace and shield only to trigger when using Leap Slam. This is just nice to leap over terrain or to get through enemies that are blocking your path because we have a lot of movement speed that we rely on to survive, so if we're denied movement, we die. Leap Slam helps to ensure that we can always move, even in those tough situations where enemies are backing you into a corner. Now for the passive skill tree, we only want damage, attack speed, and movement speed at first. Evasion and crit chance come later, and of course alternate between dexterity and strength until you have enough strength to use your crossbow skills. Then dump it all into dexterity. So the tree starts out in the ranger area, which has a lot of juicy value. Heavy ammunition will reduce our attack speed, but gives a lot of damage and stun build up in return, and we'll get that attack speed back soon enough with acceleration and falcon dive. Remember to skip the crit nodes for now because they need a lot of investment before they start to give some payoff. Then the crossbow nodes give increased reload speed and extra damage for each type of ammunition fired in the past 10 seconds. We typically only use one type of ammo, but remember we can start out using plasma blast and then swap to high velocity bolts, or we can also use galvanic shards and swap between the two when fighting big groups of mobs and then finishing off the last few mobs. Then we get more attack speed and chance to blind enemies on hit, which happens quite often because of how many projectiles we shoot and how fast. Then more crossbow reload time, and we can go back and pick up the crit nodes at this point going north from the fork in the road, and then making a stop for some evasion synergy, dexterity, and extra attack speed per dexterity. Acrobatics is not worth it in my opinion because we can't afford to stack more evasion chance to make up for the loss in rating, and we need to go for as much damage as efficiently possible to really pop enemies before they get a chance to reach us. There's also Death from Afar, which gives extra crit chance and damage to enemies further than 6 meters away, which is easy to maintain when we have so much pin buildup. I also instilled Crashing Wave on my amulet for 36 increased damage after landing a crit, and you can get that from the green, purple, and blue distillations, which you can get from the currency exchange. Just right click them and put them in the right order and pop in your amulet for a decently cheap but high value node. But if you can afford more, then I would go for Deadly Force for the best crit synergy. Now the Ascendancy is a very important part of this build, and I've neglected to speak about it for a while. But the main reason we want Deadeye for Crossbow is because of Tailwind and Endless Munitions. Tailwind increases your evasion, movement speed, and attack speed for every stack, and you simply get this by using skills. If you get hit, you lose those stacks, but it's very easy to regain them because you have high attack speed. Also, when using crossbows, reloading or swapping ammo types counts as a skill, so this adds up extra stacks that you can use to maintain your tailwind when you're running around but don't want to waste ammo. The best way to keep your tailwind without investing anything is actually to cast Plasma Blast, but to immediately let go of the button. You can't fire the blast if you don't fully charge it, so you don't waste any ammo. And you don't move any slower since you don't spend any time charging the blast either. Just begin and end it instantly, and you won't even notice a difference in your character, but you'll keep the stacks. Your second Ascendancy will make the first attack that hits you deal less damage when you have Tailwind, so it prevents those big one-shot attacks more efficiently, but it doesn't do so well against smaller attacks that break your Tailwind, then continue to pelt you. When you get your third Ascendancy, you should immediately respec out those last 2 points and put them into the projectiles line, because you can get extra damage to enemies further away, and then an extra projectile on all of your attacks, which makes you do a lot of burst damage. It's probably smarter to use the Tailwind damage reduction, but it just feels so good getting that extra projectile sooner. By the time your full build is online, you can go for your fourth Ascendancy point, and then put that back into the Tailwind damage reduction. Now for the items, our most important offensive stats come from our weapon, and the crossbow needs to have as much physical damage modifiers as possible, attack speed and base critical chance if possible, and plus to level of projectile skills. High skill levels increases your damage drastically because it increases the base damage, which scales so much better with all your crit modifiers. But it also makes your mana pool dip very low every time you reload. This is why you want Mana Leech on physical damage. So I have life and Mana Leech on my weapon and rings. This means that I'll never run out of mana so long as I'm hitting things with my high velocity rounds. But when using Galvanic Shards or gas grenades, you won't get that mana refunded. For defensive stats, we want resistances as always. Evasion rating with the Tailwind and the Wind Dancer buff stacked can easily go up to 80% with little investment. And then maximum life. Since we can't go for Energy Shield, which requires intelligence, and we need strength and dexterity, our best source of effective health is just health. And using the evasion to prevent sustained pressure, the Tailwind damage reduction to prevent heavy hits, then just leeching life back with damage and flask. If you're going against a boss that can't be pinned easily or you get no value from it, you can replace your pinning boots with others, but I balance my resistances around not having boots anyway, so it's not a big deal. And that's the entire build. It's quite simple and spammy in practice, since you're just using high velocity rounds most of the time, but there's some intricate mechanics to optimizing your movement speed by understanding the rhythm of your attacks, listening to audio feedback to know exactly when to press the button for max damage and mobility. Also, get the feel for when it's enough enemies on screen to swap to Galvanic Shards. Swap back before you run out of mana though, because you gotta get that mana leech. Preemptively use gas grenades and pin them in place while they're inside the poison to maximize your armor break, and then stay as far away as possible to get the damage modifiers from a distance. Prepare for the scavenged shard reset or the random reusable ammo, which will change up your rhythm. Then you just rinse and repeat. For bosses, just precast Plasma Blast, put out gas grenade, then do high velocity rounds, emergency reload, then keep shooting. Stay mobile to avoid mechanics, but if you really must use your dodges, then do it, even though you lose a lot of movement speed when dodging. So if you like that content, then please like the video, subscribe if you'd like to see more fun and effective Path of Exile 2 builds, and I'll see you all next time.